The mirror moved under Caleb Rourke's hands. 1 second, he was braced against its maintenance frame with both boots locked to the rail. The next, the whole silver surface began to turn, dragging the frame beneath him while the black curve of Virelia rolled far below. Caleb pulled his right hand clear of the rotating joint. A steel arm swept through the space where his glove had been. His tool case struck the end of its tether and spun away, scattering flashes of reflected sunlight across his visor. Dawnline control. Maintenance override just failed, he said. Mirror is moving under array command. I need a hard hold now. Dana Holt answered from the orbital station. Her voice was calm, but the silence behind it told him everyone in the control room had stopped breathing. Local hold rejected. The command has valid array authority. I know it has authority. It has tried to remove the engineer currently attached to it. Caleb caught the tool case, clipped it to his harness, and looked across the mirror. The panel was supposed to be parked at a harmless angle while he serviced its drive. Instead, it was turning toward Virelia's sun. A line of white fire appeared along the panel's edge. His display drew the projected path a fraction of a second later. The reflected band crossed the upper atmosphere, narrowed, and swept toward the green-gold fields of the center plane. Dana warned the ground, already transmitting. Caleb reached for the manual brake. Before his glove touched it, the drive increased torque. The frame kicked hard enough to pull one boot from the rail. He swung outward over empty space. The safety line snapped tight against his waist. For a moment, Virelia filled his visor, blue oceans at the horizon and the broad patchwork of Senra directly below. Then he caught the rail with one hand and hauled himself back. The mirror completed its turn. Sunlight fell in a brilliant white stripe across the plane. Far below, Neris Valen saw the sky change. She was flying low over the flowering fields, following the morning movement of the native pollinators. The small creatures normally traveled in loose, flowing bands that bent with the polarized light above them. Now every band twisted at once. Thousands of dark wings flashed silver. The front of the swarm climbed toward the artificial dawn. The rear collided with it, lost formation, and began spiraling toward the crops. Neris checked the heat warning on her canopy. The air beneath the white stripe was warming by the second. Lena, mark every swarm inside that light, she said. Lena Dorr answered through the farm channel. I am trying. Their headings are changing too fast. Do not average them. Keep each group separate. The first pollinators struck the broad leaves below. More fell behind them. Neris banked toward the light. Her aircraft was built for seeding, sampling, and low-altitude survey work. It was not built to fly into a concentrated orbital reflection. The heat alarm shifted from yellow to red before she reached the edge. She armed the seed net. Tovin, clear the workers from the eastern rows. Tovin Pell did not waste time asking why. Clearing now. Neris pulled the aircraft up across the path of the beam and released the net. The woven sheet burst open behind her. It was designed to carry seed across a wide strip of ground, but its pale fibers also scattered the reflected light. The hard white band broke into a trembling veil. The temperature inside the cockpit climbed. Below her, the swarms changed. They stopped climbing. Some still fell, but the spirals loosened. The creatures turned toward the darker lanes between the crop rows and dropped into the shelter of the leaves. It worked, Lena said. For a few seconds, the net's heat warning appeared on Neris's display. One corner had already begun to curl. She cut the release line and banked out. The damaged sheet drifted clear, no longer a barrier, but still softening the sharp edge of the reflected band as it fell. Neris leveled the aircraft above the fields. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. A new voice entered the emergency channel. Agricultural aircraft over Senra. Identify yourself. She knew the voice. Caleb Rourke had attended 3 joint calibration sessions during the last seasonal expansion. His temporary maintenance rotation was supposed to end once the new schedule stabilized, and he had spent most of those meetings asking why biological limits arrived as ranges instead of single numbers. Neris Valen. Ecological systems. I should have guessed. Because I just put farm equipment in front of your mirror? Because no one else has ever answered an orbital heat warning by throwing a seed net at it. The remark was dry, almost absurd, but his next words were sharp with focus. Your net changed the swarm before it reduced the heat very much. What did they respond to? Neris looked down at the creatures gathering in the dark rows. Polarization. They used the sky's light pattern to hold direction. Your reflection gave them a signal too strong to ignore. Can you prove that fast? Can you stop the light fast? There was a short pause. That is what I am trying to determine. Above her, the white stripe shifted again. Neris pushed the aircraft toward open ground while Caleb fought the mirror's drive. He could not stop it completely, but he managed to reduce the turn and hold the beam between two populated farming zones. Dana's voice entered both channels. Caleb, I am opening emergency maintenance authority. You may command local drives inside the Luma exclusion limits. No unverified path may cross the city corridor. Understood. Caleb secured both boots and entered a staged shutdown for the mirror cluster. Neris saw the command appear on her agricultural display. The proposed sequence would dim one section of the artificial dawn at a time. Do not execute that. Neris, this beam is already above safe heat. The flowers have opened early. The swarms have been pulled into active flight. If you drop them into sudden darkness now, they will lose the last directional pattern they have. Darkness does not burn a city. No, but can destroy this pollination window. Caleb kept one hand over the confirmation control. Explain. Neris guided her aircraft lower. The plants beneath her had opened their pale flowers hours before the natural cycle. The extended light schedule had raised their surface temperature and triggered pollen release across entire fields. The crop is already committed to this cycle, she said. If the light vanishes, the flowers close while the pollen is exposed. The surface cools, moisture condenses, and the pollen binds before the swarms can move it. We will save the leaves and lose the seed. How long before that happens? I need field measurements. Then I cannot base an orbital shutdown on it. And I cannot let you erase the cycle because your system never measured it. The two of them fell silent. Caleb had heard Neris argue in calibration rooms. She was not careless. She simply refused to pretend that living systems obeyed clean lines because engineers preferred them. He also knew exactly what a drifting reflection could do to Luma. Dana, he said, hold the full shutdown. I'm going to test one local reduction inside the safe corridor. You have 90 seconds before the projected path approaches the eastern limit. Neris, I can give you 90 seconds. Give me 60. I will use the rest to tell you whether stopping is worse. Caleb reduced the mirror by a fraction of a degree. The response was immediate. Two neighboring mirrors changed angle to compensate. Their reflections slid together, narrowing the white stripe until the center brightened beyond the original level. Canceling, Caleb said. He restored the angle. The neighboring drives kept moving for another 3 seconds before settling. Pavel Rin came onto the channel from the station's systems bay. Motor temperatures are climbing across the group. Commands and sensors are valid. I'm not seeing a fault flag. Because the array thinks it is correcting a fault, Caleb said. Dana sent him a new projection. More mirror paths were converging on the same orbital phase. Current estimate is 4 hours before the reflected corridor reaches Luma, she said. Less if the thermal drift accelerates. Caleb looked across the mirror's glowing surface. This was no isolated drive failure. The whole Dawnline array was beginning to move like one machine. Pavel, check the maintenance craft. Fuel, tow points, everything. Primary tanks are nominal. Reserve maneuvering fuel is full. Tow coupling is available. Good. Do not allocate the reserve. I was not planning to. I enjoy being agreed with before anyone knows why. Far below, Neris landed beside the first affected field. The dark lanes between the crops were alive with exhausted pollinators. Their wings opened and closed in uneven waves as they tried to settle. Lena stood at the field console, pulling swarm tracks from agricultural sensors and separating the tangled lines into distinct groups. Tovin waited near a row of cutting machines. "Do you want open lanes through the flowers?" he asked. "Not yet. If the beam comes back, we may not have time. If you cut the wrong lanes, they will follow the gaps away from the viable flowers. Keep the machines ready. Nothing moves until we know the route." Neris knelt beside the nearest plants. Their flowers were fully open. Fine grains of pollen clung to the inner surfaces, already taking on moisture where shadows cooled the petals. She touched one sample to a field reader. The plant was healthy. Its reproductive window was not. "Lena, map every swarm that reached shade. I want altitude, direction, and how long it took them to settle. That will take time. Use the net event as the common marker." Lena nodded and returned to the console. Neris opened her link to Caleb. Behind his voice, she could hear the low mechanical rhythm of the maintenance craft. "The flowers are already releasing pollen," she said. "I can give you limits, but not from the production dashboard. I no longer trust that dashboard as much as I did 10 minutes ago." It was not an apology. From Caleb, it was close. Neris watched another mirror brighten overhead. "There is something you need to know," she said. "I approved the last increase in Dawnline's light schedule." He did not answer immediately. "The trial plots gained mass," she continued. "The swarms adjusted for the first few days. I recommended extending the program." "How long did the trials run?" "Not through a full seed cycle. Then both of our systems stopped measuring too early." She looked up. "You're not going to tell me this is my fault. Would that improve the numbers?" Despite herself, Neris almost smiled. Caleb's tone hardened again. "I need 3 things. Maximum light the swarms can tolerate. Minimum dark interval they need. To reset direction. Polarization angle that brings them back toward viable flowers. And I need the mirror paths, not just their brightness. I will send them." Another drive entered the synchronized phase. The artificial dawn spread across a wider section of the plain. Neris looked at the open flowers, the exhausted creatures beneath them, and the cutting machines waiting at the edge of the field. "Then we have the same problem now," she said. "No, Caleb replied. We have 2 problems that refuse to be solved separately." Caleb sealed the maintenance craft and released it from the mirror frame. The small vessel rolled away under thruster control. Dawnline's reflected bands crossed the canopy in slow white arcs, each one brighter than it should have been. He waited until the craft cleared the moving frame, then aimed for the next mirror in the cluster. Dana gave him a narrow approach window. "You have 12 minutes before its safe corridor moves behind the station. Plenty of time." That was not an invitation to improvise. Then it was a poorly worded message. Pavel sent the drive logs to Caleb's display. Every command had a valid source. Every sensor reported within its designed range. Nothing looked broken until the logs were placed beside one another. The array had been built to extend dawn across Senra. When one mirror moved away from its assigned target, neighboring mirrors adjusted to preserve the total light. That helped when a drive lagged or a panel flexed in changing heat. Now the same feature was binding them together. Caleb opened the thermal map. The sunlit sides of several frames had expanded by a few millimeters. Their angle sensors read the bend as an aiming error, so the control system corrected it. That correction heated the drives and bent the frames a little more. The mirrors were not disobeying. They were obeying one another into a tighter and tighter beam. "Pavel, run the compensation history against the new light schedule." "Running." "Dana, has anyone changed the array objective?" The agricultural target was revised after the last seasonal trial. Longer photosynthetic period, higher coverage, lower tolerance for dark gaps. "Any unauthorized access?" "None." Pavel's results appeared. The synchronized drift began within hours of the revised schedule, taking full effect. Caleb stared at the graph. "There is no sabotage," he said. "That should be good news," Dana replied. "It would be if the person who broke it had left us a switch." He sent the objective structure to Neris. It contained fields for total light, crop temperature, target coverage, and expected plant mass. There was nothing for pollinator rest, pollen condition, or polarization. "Your biology is not being ignored by a damaged system," he told her. "It was never represented in the system at all. Neris received his message while standing over the field console with Lena. The map had begun to make sense. The pollinators that reached shade fastest had not taken the shortest route. They had followed the edge where the seed net changed the pattern of reflected light. Neris overlaid their paths on the planting rows. A common heading appeared. They were trying to recover the seasonal line, she said. Lena enlarged the track. The line is almost 30 degrees away from the nearest dark lane. Because darkness is not the destination. It only gives them a pause long enough to read direction again. Neris selected 6 affected fields and requested wing rhythm, altitude, and body temperature from the sensors. Then she ordered flower samples from both sides of the beam's path. The current yield dashboard still showed an increase. Healthy stems, broad leaves, strong growth. Yet the number of swarm visits had fallen since the extended dawn schedule began. Neris opened a channel to the seed archive. Orin, I need germination and seed count records from every Sinra plot that used extended light. Orindace answered from the storage complex. How many seasons? All available. That is not a small request. Neither is losing next season because we measured the wrong part of this one. He heard the urgency in her voice. I will start the poll. Neris returned to the live swarm data. She identified a maximum light level based on the groups that had recovered under the scattered beam. The dark interval was harder. Too brief, and they did not settle. Too long, and the open flowers would begin cooling toward closure. She sent Caleb a range instead of one number. His reply came immediately. This is not a setting. This is a negotiation. Welcome to biology. I was afraid you would say that. Caleb docked with the next mirror and transferred the biological ranges into a local test sequence. The limits overlapped, but only narrowly. He could reduce the reflection enough to protect the swarms. He could insert a short dark interval without cooling the flowers too far. What he did not yet know was whether he could aim the polarized component in the right direction. Neris called before he launched the test. I have the first flower samples. A rapid light drop closes the outer petals. The exposed pollen cools faster than the rest of the flower. How fast? The usable window begins narrowing in less than 4 minutes. That is not much of a night. For the plant, it comes at the worst possible moment. Caleb checked the drive temperature. Every large mirror movement costs us heat margin. I can test one pulse now. If the angle is wrong, the drive will need time before it moves again. Then keep the intensity and timing inside my range. We will learn the angle from a swarm. You will be near the test field, at the edge, not under the reflection. Good. I have already had one conversation today with someone who thought a seed net counted as heat shielding. It counted for 32 seconds. I'm adding that to the maintenance manual. Neris climbed back into the agricultural aircraft. Tovin kept the workers outside the test zone, while Lena routed live sensor feeds to both cockpits. Caleb waited for Dana to confirm a path. The entire sweep remains west of Luma, she said. You are cleared for one local pulse. He unlocked the mirror's drive. Neris, ready? Ready. Caleb changed the panel angle by a small fraction. The reflection moved across Senra, not as the hard white stripe from before, but as a dimmer band. He held it for 8 seconds, let darkness cross the field, then restored the light for another 6. Below, the pollinators responded. The scattered groups lifted from the leaves. They formed a dense moving cloud above the crop. For one hopeful second, they traveled toward the viable flowers. Then the whole cloud curved. It bent into a circle and began rotating over the field. They are flying, Caleb said. They are trapped in the signal. Neris banked along the outside of the circle. The swarm was no longer falling, and its body temperatures were stable. The rhythm had worked. The intensity had worked. The heading had not. The polarization is turned relative to the field, she said. The soil reflection is rotating the line they see. Can you calculate the correction? With Lena's ground data. Pavel cut into the channel. Caleb, drive temperature is rising faster than the model. You need to park it. Caleb saw the warning and ended the pulse. He moved the mirror into a safe holding angle, then locked the drive. The swarm dropped into the rows again. It was alive, but it had gained no ground. Caleb leaned back in his seat. For the first time in my career, a system has passed 2/3 of the test by making the test subject fly in circles. Neris heard the fatigue behind the humor. The intensity was safe, she said. The dark interval let them reset. Only the heading failed. I know, you do not sound pleased. I am pleased in a limited, overheating sort of way. Pavel sent the new thermal projection. That drive could not support another large adjustment before the danger window closed. The test had cost them a mirror movement, but it had removed 2 unknowns. Neris landed near Lena's mobile console and studied the circular flight path. The wrong direction was not random. It matched the reflected pattern created by the test angle and the orientation of the crop rows. Separate the terrain effect from the sky angle, she told Lena. Use the dark irrigation strips as fixed references. Lena began rebuilding the map. Neris called Caleb. Do not move that mirror again. I was not planning to. For the second test, I can use the ground layout to reduce the correction you need. Ow! The swarm does not need a perfect sky. It needs one unambiguous route. Caleb studied the farm map she sent. The terrain broke into too many choices. Flowering blocks lay on both sides of irrigation lanes, service roads, and darker soil. A tired swarm could follow any of them. You want to simplify the ground. Not yet. First, I want to find a route that requires the smallest angle change. Dana interrupted with an updated orbital projection. The safe aiming region will narrow by almost half on the next pass. Luma is moving under the eastern edge of the possible sweep. Caleb checked the compensation network. One mirror was reacting more slowly than the rest. Its drive accepted commands, but its angle lagged, forcing neighboring panels to correct around it. He marked it. I may have found the anchor. The anchor? One mirror is holding the error in place. The others keep trying to match it. Can you turn it off? We already learned what the array does when I try that. He plotted a route to the lagging mirror. The craft could reach it before the next approach window closed, but only if he left immediately. I'm going to inspect it directly, while I build the second light path. Do not cut any fields until we know the light can lead them. Neris looked toward the waiting machines. That was already my order. Then we have achieved another engineering milestone. Which one? Agreement before disaster. The channel went quiet as Caleb accelerated toward the lagging mirror. Neris watched his trajectory move across her display. She had spent years arguing that Dawnline's dark intervals were part of the ecosystem, not lost production. Caleb had spent years making sure every reflected band stayed exactly where it belonged. Now the system had made both of them wrong in different ways. Lena highlighted a possible route through the central fields. This line has the fewest branches, she said, but it crosses the highest yield flowering block. Neris studied it. The route was broad enough for several swarms, and its end reached flowers that had stayed just cool enough to preserve their pollen. It was also filled with plants she had promised to protect. Mark it, she said. Tovin looked at the map. Should I position the cutters? Position them. Do not start. If the route is right, we will lose that entire strip. If we cut before there is a light path, we may lose the strip and the swarms. Tovin nodded and began placing machines along the edge. Neris looked at the production dashboard again. It still glowed green. That color bothered her more now than the alarms. Caleb sent a new overlay while his craft crossed the distance to the lagging mirror. Instead of showing only where each reflection landed, it showed the direction of the polarized component at ground level. The lines changed as the mirrors changed angle, then changed again where light struck wet soil, broad leaves, or the dark irrigation channels. Neris placed the overlay across Lena's field map. The circular test path now had a visible cause. The light had reached the field at a safe intensity, but its directional line bent across the crop, rose, and closed back on itself. The swarm had simply followed a signal that told it to keep turning. Your first test created a loop, Neris said. That is a more dignified description than flying in circles. The swarm did exactly what the light instructed. My mirror has never been accused of giving biological instructions before. It has been giving them for years. We only started listening today. Caleb became quiet. Neris used the overlay to test 3 possible routes. The first required a mirror angle that Caleb marked unsafe because the adjustment would sweep too near Luma. The second reached a cooler flower block, but the ground reflection split the polarized line at 2 irrigation pools. Exhausted swarms would divide there. The third route crossed the high-yield plants. It was not ideal. It was simply the only route that remained possible in both the sky and the field. Neris enlarged it and found 2 sharp bends. "Can you soften the first turn?" she asked. "Not without another large movement from the test group. Then I can use a dark soil lane to carry it. The second turn, I need to inspect it from the air." Dana's next update crossed their share map. 3 hours, 6 minutes to the current Luma limit. Thermal drift is still accelerating. The number gave every choice a new weight. Neris could have asked for more sampling. Caleb could have run a longer simulation. Neither would matter if the array entered the city corridor before they acted. "I'm sending you the mirror's likely polarization range, not a fixed angle," Caleb said. "The frame is still expanding. By the time I reach it, the exact line may have moved. Then send the direction of movement too. You can use that. I can reject a route that will become worse before the swarms reach it." He added the thermal trend. Neris removed the second route. The ground split was already dangerous, and the changing mirror angle would make it wider. Only the path through the flowering block remained. She did not tell Tovin to cut. Not yet. Instead, she asked Lena to model what happened if all surviving swarms entered the route within the same short window. The projected cloud crowded at the first bend, then divided. "We need staggered bands," Neris said. "I was already planning separate mirror groups," Caleb replied. "Not only for intensity. Each band has to release the next set of swarms after the group ahead clears the bend. That means you will control timing from the ground, and you will control whether each angle remains safe in orbit." The division of responsibility was becoming clearer. So was the dependence. Caleb sent a preliminary 4-band sequence. Neris overlaid it on the swarm map, changed the pause between the first 2 bands, and returned it. "You lengthened the dark interval. The leading groups will be denser. Longer darkness cools the flowers. Only at the corridor entrance. The viable flowers are at the far end." Caleb checked the temperature projection. "It fits by less than a minute. But it fits. For now." The warning mattered. Every plan they made was temporary until he examined the lagging mirror. Neris closed the map and climbed back into the agricultural aircraft. She would inspect the route's second bend, while Caleb inspected the machine, holding the sky in the wrong pattern. The lagging mirror grew across Caleb's canopy. Unlike the others, its reflected edge trembled as the drive fought itself. Every few seconds, the panel corrected a fraction toward the array's target, stopped, and slipped back. Neighboring mirrors answered with movements of their own. Caleb matched rotation and brought the maintenance craft alongside the service frame. "Dana, I need local isolation on this unit. Isolation will increase compensation in the surrounding group. I do not need it off. I need 30 seconds where it stops arguing with my hands." Dana checked the path. Granted inside the current angle. Caleb locked the craft to the frame and crossed through the maintenance collar. Heat from a mirror's sunward surface moved through the structure in slow pulses. His suit could handle it for a limited time. The joint housing might not. He opened the drive cover. The command motor was intact. So were the power lines and angle sensors. He released the first mechanical catch. It moved. The second catch did not. Caleb put a power tool against the release and watched the load climb. The frame had expanded unevenly around the locking collar, squeezing it out of alignment. The motor was receiving every order the array sent, but the lock allowed only part of the requested movement. Each partial movement became a new error. Each error made the rest of Dawnline compensate. "Found it," Caleb said. Pavel brought up the mechanical plan. "Can you cut the lock free?" "Not without losing control of the panel." "Can it cool?" Caleb checked the projected temperature. The mirror would remain sunlit until after the danger window. Not in time. He looked at the tow point built into the service frame. Maintenance craft used it to move disabled equipment a few degrees away from working formations. It was not meant to fight a live mirror that still carried rotational momentum. Pavel, show me a tow release from this angle. The simulation appeared. If Caleb coupled the craft to the frame, used its thrusters to counter the mirror's turn, and released the jam catch under reduced load, he could pull the reflective surface away from the synchronized phase. The mirror would stay in its orbit. It would simply stop aiming with the others. The required fuel estimate appeared in red. That is most of your reserve, Pavel said. I noticed the color. You would have enough operational fuel to stabilize and return slowly. No fast retreat. No second tow. Caleb studied the estimate. And if the release sticks halfway, you'll have spent the fuel and kept the anchor. A wonderfully efficient failure. He inspected the coupling point by hand. The metal was hot, but undamaged. The maneuver was possible. It was not yet justified. I'm not pulling it until Neris proves she can use the opening. He secured the cover and moved back toward the craft. On the ground, the possible corridor had become a line of waiting machines. Neris flew above it at low speed, while Lena mapped the light reflected from soil, leaves, and irrigation strips. The original route bent twice before reaching the viable flowers. Each bend created a place where the swarms might divide. Neris adjusted the entry line to use a darker irrigation channel as a visual boundary. That moves the route deeper into the flowering block, Tovin warned. Mark the change. We will cut more. Only if the light test works. He marked it without further argument. Neris sent the revised geometry to Caleb. He was back inside the maintenance craft, one hand resting near the controls while the array's warnings multiplied. The route reduces the mirror correction by almost half, he said. The field carries part of the direction. That sentence would have been useful during design. You did not ask the field. The field never attends meetings. Perhaps it learned better judgment. Caleb gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. The moment passed, but Neris felt the change. Earlier, every question between them had been a challenge. Now, they were looking for the same narrow opening from opposite sides. Dana cleared a second test path west of Luma. This is the last broad movement I can approve for that group, she said. Afterward, drive heat will force a final lock or shutdown. Understood, Caleb said. Neris took position over the marked route. Several small swarms still rested beneath the plants near its entrance. Their body temperatures were stable, but their activity rhythms showed they were close to rising again. Lena, isolate the nearest group. Tovin, keep all machines still. Caleb loaded the new angle. Neris, confirm your dark interval. 9 seconds after the first band. Then bring the second band from the southwest. The southwest adjustment leaves very little margin against the soil reflection. The route is using that reflection. I dislike plans that depend on dirt. The dirt has been here longer than Dawnline. That does not make it certified. Neris watched the swarm. It makes it available. Caleb checked the city exclusion path once more. Donna. Clear. He moved the first mirror group. A soft band of light appeared across the entrance of the corridor. It was bright enough to wake the resting pollinators, but far below the heat of the original beam. The swarm rose. This time, it did not curve. The creatures formed a tapered cloud and moved along the dark irrigation line. After 9 seconds, Caleb parked the first group. Shadow crossed the route. The swarm slowed and compressed, reading the remaining sky. Then the second band appeared from the southwest. The cloud turned with it. Neris followed from above, hardly breathing. The swarm crossed the first bend, stayed within the marked line, and reached the flowers at the far end. Dark wings settled across pale petals. Within seconds, the first pollinators began moving pollen. They made it, Lena said. Neris allowed herself one moment of relief. They made one route. Pavel's warning sounded over the shared link. Second drive is at its thermal ceiling. Caleb locked the group before the angle drifted. The motors went still, but the temperature continued rising from stored heat. That group cannot do another large turn, he said. Neris looked across the plain. The successful swarm was only one of dozens. We cannot repeat the test for each group. No, one final sequence, with the mirrors divided into bands. After that, the drives either hold or they do not. The solution was now visible, and so was its limit. The sky could be divided. The ground had to be simplified enough for every swarm to use the same divided light. Neris returned to the field console. Lena overlaid the successful path on the flowering map. The line through the high-yield block was no longer merely possible. It was necessary. Still, Neris did not issue the cutting order. She looked at the flowers along the route. The crop had recovered from a difficult early season. Cutting that strip would remove a measurable part of the harvest and place her name beside the loss. Caleb appeared on the field screen from his cockpit. His face was tired behind the reflected data. "The route worked," he said. "For one swarm. It gives us the geometry for the rest. If I cut the corridor..." "Yes." Neris folded her arms. "You make it sound simple." "No, I make it sound specific." She knew the distinction. Specific choices were harder to hide from. An archive notification appeared on her display. Oren had completed the first data pull. "Neris," he said when she opened the channel, "I have the extended light plots. I am sending plant mass, harvested volume, seed count, and germination." "Thank you. The records are not clean. Some plots use imported seed the following year, so local germination was not always tested." "Send the gaps too." The files arrived in layers. The first numbers looked familiar. Extended light increased plant mass. Harvested volume stayed high. On the same dashboard Dawnline used, the program had succeeded. Then Lena placed the current swarm visits beside the archive. Plots with the longest artificial dawn produced fewer viable seeds. The decline was easy to miss because the edible portion of the crop had remained strong. Several farms simply imported seed the next season and never marked the purchase as a biological failure. Neris opened the current flower samples. The pollen was still alive in the warmer fields, but less of it had been transported. Without the swarms, healthy flowers were ending their reproductive window untouched. "Caleb, I need your production data beside this." He joined the archive link. Together, they lined up Dawnline's target values with Oren's seed records. Caleb found the missing field first. "The optimizer tracks crop mass and harvest coverage," he said. "It does not track seed replacement, because imported seed was treated as supply, not failure. The plants can survive the continuous light." Neris looked at the successful test swarm, working the flowers, but they cannot reproduce without the pollinators. The meaning settled between them. If they left Dawnline running, much of the current crop might still be harvested. From a distance, the fields would look saved. Reports would show high mass and healthy leaves. Then next year's planting would begin with too few local seeds. And if the native swarms were lost, the dependence would not end after one shipment. Virelia would have to import seed again and again. Caleb broke the silence. A safe city and a full harvest can still be a failure. Neris nodded. If there is no next season. The corridor on her map turned from a possible sacrifice into the only route that protected both the ecosystem and the future crop. Tovin stood nearby, waiting. Neris called him over. "Put every cutter on the marked line. The revised one." "Do I start?" "Not until I give a word. If you open it before Caleb has a light band ready, the swarms will divide at the empty ground." "How much will we lose?" Neris looked at the estimate. "Enough that no one will call this an undamaged harvest." Tovin accepted the answer. "I will have the crews ready." He left to organize the machines. Neris stayed beside the map. For days after approving the extended dawn, she had defended the decision with the rising growth figures. When the first unusual swarm behavior appeared, she had told herself the insects would adjust. Now, protecting every plant would only repeat the same mistake in another form. It would preserve what the dashboard could see and sacrifice what it could not. "I will authorize the cut," she told Caleb. "I will sign the ecological order myself." He did not praise her. She was grateful for that. "I will release the stuck mirror," he said. "How much fuel?" "Most of the reserve." "What does that mean for you?" "I can hold attitude and return on the slow window. I cannot retreat quickly if the mirror swings wrong. I cannot make a second toe." Neris studied his face on the screen. "You were not going to mention that until after?" "I just mentioned it before. Because I asked. Because your part of the plan is now real enough to justify mine." It was not a comfortable answer, but it was an honest one. Then no one acts alone, she said. I do not cut until you are coupled and the first band is ready. You do not release the mirror until I confirm the corridor. Agreed. Caleb sent her the final mirror grouping. She sent him the final corridor geometry. For the first time, each held a plan that could not succeed without the other. Dana's voice entered the channel. Migration activity is rising across Senra. The Eastern Mirror Corridor reaches the Luma limit in 76 minutes. Caleb closed the tow simulation. Neris opened the emergency ecological authorization. Before we commit, Caleb said, we walked through the order one last time. Neris almost told him there was no time. Then she remembered what a single misplaced action could do. Go. I couple to the stuck mirror and hold the load. You keep the cutters still until every final angle is loaded. Then the migration begins. I confirm the first band remains available and authorize the corridor. Once the route is open, you tell me. I release the catch and pull the mirror out of phase before any final group moves. You confirm the anchor is clear. Then I give you the leading swarms. I bring the first band. You control the timing from there. Neris watched the density forecast on Lena's map. If the swarms rise before the corridor is open, I keep them in the existing dark rows. You do not release early. If a mirror path enters the Luma boundary, I stop that group even if your corridor is ready. If the first band is late, Tovin holds the cutters. If the tow fails, Neris did not answer immediately. The honest answer was that there would be no second complete plan. Caleb could still move some mirrors into safe parking angles, and she could preserve some swarms in the remaining shadows, but they could not create the full corridor of light. Then we protect Luma first and save whatever part of the ecosystem the remaining angles allow, she said. Agreed. It was not a heroic promise to succeed. It was a shared definition of what they would refuse to sacrifice blindly. Dana confirmed Caleb's emergency authority for the final sequence. On the ground, Neris signed the preliminary order that allowed Tovin's crews to enter the marked field but not cut until her direct command. Pavel sent the latest fuel estimate. Lena sent the latest swarm positions. Caleb and Neris placed both on the same display. No one acts alone, Neris said. No one acts without saying the cost, Caleb added. The words were simple, but they changed the silence between them. Earlier, Caleb had demanded proof before trust. Neris had demanded action before delay. Now each had given the other enough truth to choose. The time for testing was over. The next hour divided itself into two maps. On the ground, Neris had the center plane, the marked corridor, the swarms, and the machines waiting beside a strip of flowering crop. In orbit, Caleb had Dawnline, the stuck mirror, the shrinking set of angles that did not cross Luma, and one tank of fuel he could spend only once. Lena tracked the swarms as their rest cycles began to break. Small groups rose from the leaves, settled, then rose again. The continuous dawn was pushing them toward migration before the corridor was ready. The northern groups are becoming active first, she said. Neris studied their positions. Keep them separate from the western groups. If we treat them as one cloud, we will send Caleb the wrong timing. Tovin reported from the line of cutting machines. All crews are in place. We can open the corridor in under 2 minutes. Only after my order. Understood. Neris flew the length of the marked route one more time. The crop below was dense and pale with open flowers. At the far end, the fields protected from the worst heat still held viable pollen. Those are the flowers that mattered now. She adjusted the entry point by several rows so the first band would meet the leading swarms without crossing a reflective irrigation pool. Lena updated the map and transmitted the change to Caleb. His reply came after a brief delay. I can absorb that adjustment in the second mirror group. No new movement for the first. Will it change the dark interval? By less than a second. Acceptable. That is the most encouraging word you have used all day. Neris looked at the crop she was preparing to cut. Do not get used to it. Above Virelia, Caleb docked with the stuck mirror. The maintenance craft's tow coupling extended from its forward frame. He aligned it with the service point he had inspected earlier and eased in under tiny thruster pulses. The coupling locked. Through the craft, He felt the mirror's uneven rotation as a slow pressure against the hull. Pavel monitored the load from the station. Connection is stable. The jam catch is still carrying most of the torque. That is why I am here. Reserve fuel is isolated and ready. Caleb brought up the final sequence. First, he would counter the mirror's rotation until the mechanical load dropped enough for the catch to release. Then he would pull the reflective surface away from the array's synchronized angle. The mirror would remain in its orbital track, but its light would miss the shared target. Only after that could the other groups move into Neris's polarized bands without the anchor dragging them back. Dana displayed the Luma exclusion boundary in red across his screen. Your tow path remains clear, she said. The group rotations do not for long. How long? 48 minutes before thermal drift removes the second band's planned angle. Caleb checked the drives. We will be finished before then. That sounded confident. It was intended to reassure me. The leading edge of dawn line brightened. One of the mirrors Caleb had parked began to drift. Its frame had absorbed heat even after the drive locked, and a slight change in shape moved the reflection east. Dana marked the new path. The band approached the edge of Luma's exclusion zone. Caleb, Group 3 is drifting. He opened the control. The obvious correction was a separate thruster tow or a large drive movement. Either would use resources he needed for the stuck mirror or spend the last thermal margin before the final sequence. He refused both. Instead, he recalculated the group pattern. The first band could be weakened by removing the drifting mirror from it. The second band could carry more of the directional change, but only if Neris moved the corridor entry. He sent the proposal. Neris saw the altered light geometry spread across the field map. The new entry point moved deeper into the high-yield block. That requires another 6 rows, she said, inside the area already marked for sacrifice. At the edge of it, I can keep the original line, but the first band passes too close to Luma. Neris looked down. The crop did not become less alive because a map had colored it red. Move the entry, she said. I will take the 6 rows. Tovin received the change, repositioning the eastern cutters. Caleb excluded the drifting mirror, lowered the first band's planned intensity, and shifted the directional load to the second group. New path is clear of Luma, Dana confirmed. Neris reviewed it against the field reflection, and clear for the swarms. The plan had changed, but its purpose had not. They had simply used the remaining margin more carefully. That thought steadied her. It also made the next choice heavier. The swarm alarms rose. Across Senra, dark clouds lifted from the crops. The northern groups climbed first, just as Lena predicted. Under the continuous artificial dawn, they began turning toward the strongest white band instead of the seasonal route. Migration is starting, Lena said. Neris brought the aircraft to the corridor entrance. Tovin, standing by. She checked Caleb's status. Tow coupling locked. Reserve fuel ready. Final group angles loaded. Dana's control authority active. Caleb confirmed first band. Calculated and armed. It cannot move until the anchor is released. Confirm your tow. Coupled. 1 burn. No useful second attempt. Neris placed her hand over the ecological authorization. The document listed the estimated crop loss. It also placed her name beneath the decision. She thought of the green production dashboard. She thought of the missing seed data. She thought of the trial she had approved because the plants looked stronger. This time, she would not protect the number and abandon the system beneath it. Neris signed. Tovin opened the corridor. The cutting machines moved. They entered the flowering block in a single line. Pale stalks folded beneath their wide fronts. Flowers that had opened under dawn line disappeared into the cut, leaving a dark strip of soil and low stems. Neris flew above the machines, holding the entry point on her display. Keep the center continuous, she told Tovin. No gaps at the first bend. Eastern cutters are on the revised rows. The corridor extended across the plain. Behind the machines lay the part of the harvest Neris had chosen to lose. Ahead of them lay the flowers she was trying to save. First section open, Tovin said. Neris checked the approaching swarms. Continue. The last cutters reached the far end and turned aside. The route was clear. Caleb, corridor confirmed. He opened the reserve fuel valves. The maintenance craft's engines changed tone. Caleb felt the thrust build through the toe, coupling, and into the mirror frame. The stuck mirror resisted. Its rotation pushed against the craft, trying to carry both of them back toward the synchronized angle. Caleb increased counterthrust. Fuel dropped across the display. Load is coming off the catch, Pavel said. Slowly, Caleb watched the mechanical indicator. The jammed catch remained red. Come on. He adjusted the thrust by a narrow amount. Not harder, but sideways against the direction of the warp collar. The load shifted. The catch moved 1 millimeter, then stopped. You are at 60% reserve, Pavel warned. I can read. I am required to provide calm, helpful information. Try some. Caleb held the new vector. The frame trembled. Dawnline's neighboring mirrors began correcting around the partial movement, and white bands slid across his canopy. Dana's voice sharpened. Compensation is increasing. Luma boundary in 4 minutes at the current rate. Caleb could stop the burn. He would keep enough fuel to return safely. The mirror would remain locked. Neris's corridor would become an empty wound through the crop, and the swarms would follow the artificial dawn away from the viable flowers. He thought of her signing the loss before asking him to spend his fuel. He increased the sideways component by a fraction. The catch released. The mirror jumped against the toe coupling. Caleb's harness tightened across his chest as the craft rolled. Warning lights filled the display. He countered the motion with operational thrusters while the main burn pulled the reflective surface away from the synchronized phase. The reserve gauge fell toward empty. Angle is separating, Pavel said. Caleb held the burn until the mirror's reflection cleared the shared target. Now, he shut the reserve valves. The craft continued to rotate with the released mirror. Caleb used the smaller attitude thrusters to stop the roll and lock both of them in a safe orientation. The mirror stayed in orbit. Its reflection spread harmlessly away from Senra and Luma. The reserve indicator read almost 0. Anchor is out, Caleb said. Dana released the final group sequence. The rest of Dawnline reacted as if a taut cable had been cut. Without the stuck angle as a reference, several mirrors moved at once. Their drives hunted for balance, overshot, and corrected back. The planned bands wavered before they had fully formed. Group 1 is not holding, Dana said. It will. Caleb switched from array-level control to the local locks he had prepared. He no longer had fuel for another large physical correction. The only tools left were the mirror drives, their remaining heat margin, and the sequence built from Neris's data. He moved the first group. Below, Neris saw the hard artificial dawn soften. A pale band appeared at the corridor entrance. It was weaker than the test band because Caleb had removed the drifting mirror. For a moment, she feared it would not be strong enough. The leading swarms turned. Not all of them. The northern groups caught the polarized line first and moved toward the open corridor. The western groups continued circling under the remaining white light. First groups responding, Lena said. Western groups are late. They will catch the second band. The first swarms enter the cut strip. With fewer flowers on either side, they did not divide. They followed the contrast between the dark ground and the directed light. Caleb held the first group until its drive temperature approached the limit. Neris, dark intervals starting. The band vanished. Shadow crossed the corridor. The swarms compressed, but kept moving. They used the pause to reset their heading. Caleb prepared the second group. An angle warning appeared. One mirror had not settled after the anchor release. If he moved the group on schedule, its reflection would cross too near Luma before joining the plan band. He delayed. On the ground, the first swarms reached the corridor's bend. Without the next light, they slowed and began collecting in a dense mass. Second band is late, Neris said. One mirror is outside the safe path. How long? I do not know yet. More swarms enter behind the first. The corridor began to fill. Lena watched the density rise. They are crowding at the bend. Neris circled above them. The creatures were not turning back, but their formation was collapsing. If Caleb responded with stronger light, the front might surge into the rear and scatter the whole mass. She compared their behavior with the successful second test. The test swarm had paused in darkness for 9 seconds before the next band. Here, the greater number needed longer to settle. Caleb, do not strengthen the second band. I was not planning to. Keep it dark. He looked at the crowding indicator she sent. They're already bunching. They are bunching because the route bends. They need time to read the new direction. The second drive is heating while it waits. If you light them now, the rear groups will push into the bend. Caleb checked the mirror outside the safe path. Its movement was slowing. Waiting cost heat margin, but moving early risked the city and the swarm. He held the group. For several long seconds, nothing illuminated the corridor. The swarm settled lower. Their movement stopped looking like panic and began to align with the open ground. Now, Neris said, Caleb, move the second group. The delayed mirror cleared the exclusion path. A new polarized band appeared from the southwest, angled across the bend and toward the viable flowers. The front of the swarm turned. The rest followed. Neris watched the dark cloud stretch into a moving ribbon. They have it, Lena said. Keep tracking the rear. The western swarms finally broke from the remaining artificial dawn and moved toward the second band. They entered the corridor as the northern groups cleared the bend. Caleb locked the second group. The drive temperature crossed into red but held below failure. Group 2 locked, he said, preparing the third. The final portion of the corridor crossed open ground with little natural shade. The pollinators would overheat if the light remained too bright, but the last turn required enough polarization to keep them from drifting toward Luma's side of the plane. Neris sent the live body temperature range. Reduce intensity by 8%. That weakens the directional pattern. The ground is darker there. The contrast will carry part of it. Caleb remembered saying he disliked plans that depended on dirt. Now he trusted her enough not to repeat it. He removed one mirror from the third group and redistributed the angle across the others. The drives had just enough margin. The third band came on. It was faint, almost gentle compared with the white blaze that had begun the crisis. The swarms followed. From above, Neris could see the shape of the solution. Dawn no longer covered the plane as one continuous sheet. It had been broken into narrow, slanting paths separated by deliberate darkness. The pattern repeated in a steady rhythm. Light paused direction. It carried the swarms toward the far fields. Tobin's crews held the machines outside the route. Lena called out the remaining groups and adjusted their entry timing under Neris's direction. One small swarm drifted toward an uncut flowering patch near the corridor. Neris saw it before the route divided. Tovin, keep the western machines still. Do not chase them. They are leaving the corridor. Only the front edge. If we cut now, we create another opening. She lowered the aircraft and crossed outside the swarm, using its shadow rather than the heated light to block the false branch. The group curved back toward the polarized band. There was no new tool and no dramatic collision, only one careful correction at the right moment. The swarm rejoined the route. In orbit, the third group's motors approached their final thermal limit. Dana watched the Luma boundary. Caleb, Group 4 must lock within 90 seconds. Neris, I need final alignment. Lena fed the position of the last swarms to Neris. They were entering the corridor later than expected and flying lower. Shift the last band north by 2 degrees, Neris said. That uses the final angle margin. If you hold the plan, the band passes over them. Caleb checked the city exclusion path. 2 degrees north remained safe, but only barely. He trusted the field data. Dana, clear north adjustment. Clear by 0.4 degrees at Luma. Luxury. Caleb moved the last group. The final band descended across Senra and met the late swarms at their actual altitude. They turned into the corridor. The last drive warning sounded. Caleb locked the group. For a moment, the dawnline array went still. Then the compensation graph began falling. Without the stuck mirror anchoring the error, and with each remaining group held in a separate safe angle, the feedback loop lost its path. The mirrors stopped chasing one another. Their reflections remained divided. Array compensation decreasing, Pavel said. Motor loads are stabilizing. Dana watched the city corridor. All projected sweeps remain outside Luma. Caleb did not answer yet. He looked down through the canopy. Across the planet below, the Sinra plane was crossed by thin bands of light and shadow. From orbit, the pollinators were too small to see. Neris's voice told him what the view could not. The leading swarms reached the flowers. At the far end of the corridor, dark wings moved over the pale blooms. The first groups had arrived with time left in the pollen window. Others followed, settling across the viable plants in widening waves. Neris landed beside the final field. She stepped out and walked between the rows. Pollinators moved from flower to flower around her, carrying the fine dust that Dawnline's dashboard had never counted. Behind her, the cut corridor stretched across the plain. Ahead, the flowers remained open. Lena confirmed transport. Pollen movement is rising across the target fields. Tovin, all cutters stopped. No additional crop removed. Neris looked up at the broken dawn. Caleb, the route is working. He let out a breath he had been holding since the tow began. Dawnline is out of resonance. Luma is clear. Neris heard another warning in his cockpit. Your fuel reserve is gone. Operational tank is enough to hold and return on the slow window. How long? Dana answered for him. 43 minutes before the station can receive his approach without moving a mirror group. Neris looked at the bands still holding over the plane. Moving them for Caleb would disturb the swarms and risk the city corridor. He had known that when he spent the fuel. Can you maintain position? She asked. Yes. Do not tell me it is comfortable. I had not planned to lie that badly. The humor was faint, but it was still his. Neris sat on the edge of the field, surrounded by the sound of wings. Then hold, she said. I will stay on the channel. For the next 43 minutes, neither of them tried to call the crisis over. Caleb watched the mirror temperatures decline by fractions. Neris watched the pollen transfer count rise. Dana and Pavel prepared the slow approach. Lena and Tovin measured what had survived and what had been cut. The danger had passed. The cost remained visible. Caleb spent the waiting period with one hand near the attitude controls and the other resting on the empty reserve gauge. The released mirror stayed in its safe orientation. Without the array pulling against it, the load through the tow coupling fell to almost nothing. He could have disconnected sooner, but the craft did not have enough fuel to move clear if the mirror began rotating again. So he waited. Neris remained on the channel as promised. She did not fill the time with reassurance. She gave him useful information. Swarm temperatures were falling. Pollen movement was increasing. The dark intervals were holding. Each update told him that the fuel had purchased something real. In return, Caleb told her what was happening above. Group 2 has dropped below its thermal limit. Will it stay locked? Unless it develops an opinion. Your machines have shown many opinions today. Those were instructions followed with excessive enthusiasm. The station approach window opened at last. Dana cleared the route without changing any of the mirror bands. Caleb disconnected from the released panel, pulsed the operational thrusters, and began the slow arc back. The craft responded heavily. He had enough fuel, but not enough for correction after correction. Every movement had to be planned before he made it. Pavel guided him through the final approach. Your relative speed is high by 0.2. Correcting. Use the lower thruster pair. The upper pair is close to the reserve feed. I know where my own fuel lines are. You also spent nearly all of them. That is a fair point. Caleb adjusted once. The docking frame reached toward him. The craft entered the capture zone and locked to the station with a solid vibration through the hull. Only then did he lean back. Docking confirmed, Dana said. Dawnline remains stable. Luma corridor remains clear. Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Neris's voice came through the field channel. Are you inside? The station has successfully collected me. That was not my question. I am inside. Her breath softened. Good. The single word held more than praise would have. Caleb removed his harness and looked once more at the divided light over Sinra. How much of the field did you cut? The revised corridor plus the 6 rows. More than your first estimate. Less than losing next season. We still have to prove the seed. I know. Neither of them claimed victory. By the time Caleb completed the required checks and returned to the surface on a routine station transport. The artificial dawn had ended. Natural evening covered the Senra plain. He found Neris at the cut corridor. They had met before in clean calibration rooms, usually with a table between them and a schedule already decided. She had seemed composed then, precise and difficult to rush. Now, dust marked her flight jacket. A dark line of fatigue lay beneath her eyes. She stood among the cut plants with a sample case in one hand. Caleb stopped beside her. I expected someone to order you to rest. Several people tried, and they lacked authority over the flowers. Convenient. Neris looked at him. You returned. Slowly. You used all the reserve. Almost all. Pavel sent the exact number. Pavel has a dangerous respect for accuracy. They walked along the corridor. In darkness, the loss looked different. The cut strip was not dramatic. It was simply empty where living plants had stood that morning. At the far end, field lights glowed over the flowers that had received the swarms. Neris stopped beside one of the surviving rows. Initial pollen transfer is above the minimum, she said. That does not guarantee viable seed. How long before we know? The first indicators in several days. Full viability later. Caleb nodded. Neris glanced at him. You're not going to tell me the array is safe now. The array is stable now. Safe requires a schedule that understands what it is illuminating. That sounds almost ecological. Do not spread it around. They continued walking. At the bend where the swarm had crowded, Neris knelt to inspect the soil. The creatures had left tiny marks across the dark surface before taking the second band. I nearly told you to bring the lights sooner, she said. I nearly brought it sooner. If you had, the rear groups would have forced the front apart. If I had waited much longer, the drive would have crossed its heat limit. Neris rose. We were both asking the other to trust a limit we could not see. I could see mine. On a display. Caleb considered that. Fair. They reached the field where the swarms had finished their route. Most had settled for the natural night. Their wings formed a low, soft rustle beneath the leaves. Neris kept her voice quiet. When I approved the extended schedule, I thought I was balancing risk. More growth against a change the swarms seemed able to tolerate. The data supported you. Incomplete data supported me. That is usually the only kind available before a system fails. She looked toward him. Is that meant to make me feel better? No. It is meant to keep you from turning responsibility into punishment. Neris was silent. Caleb had not planned the sentence. He was more comfortable with angles than absolution. Still, he knew what it was to replay one approved decision until it became larger than every fact around it. You signed the cut, he continued. You did not hide behind a yield report. That matters. You spent the fuel. I was trying to preserve my reputation for excessive enthusiasm. This time she smiled. It was small, tired, and real. They stopped at the edge of the viable field. The seed still has to form, Neris said. Then we keep working until it does. They returned to the field console and wrote down what success would require before either of them saw the next report. The surviving flowers had to develop seed. The seed had to mature, and enough of it had to germinate to plant the following season. Plant mass alone would not close the incident. Neris placed the criteria beside her signed crop loss order. Caleb attached the mirror limits and the fuel record from the tow. No hidden costs, she said. No hidden missing measurements, he replied. Dana approved a temporary dawnline schedule built from the safe angles already holding in orbit. It provided enough light to protect the open flowers, but preserved wide, dark intervals until Caleb and Neris could design something better. The temporary schedule did not maximize growth. It did not make the dashboard glow green. It gave the swarms time to rest and the mirror drives time to cool. For the first night, that was enough. The work continued the next morning. Dawnline had to operate again. Virelia still needed light, and the reduced harvest made every remaining field more important. Caleb could not simply leave the mirrors parked. Neris could not treat one successful corridor as a permanent biological rule. They began with the logs. Caleb worked from the orbital station during the first half of each cycle. Neris worked from Senra, sending measurements of swarm rest, flower temperature, pollen condition, and seed development. The old schedule had one dominant question: how much useful light could the fields receive? The new schedule needed several. When did the swarms sleep? How long did they need to read the sky? Which reflection angles created a navigable pattern? When did the flowers open? When did more light stop producing more future crop? Caleb built the constraints into a test model. The first version protected dark intervals, but placed them at the same time across the plane. Neris rejected it. The northern swarms begin their rest earlier. The total darkness is the same. The timing is not. You are asking for different dawns in neighboring fields. You just divided one dawn into 4 bands. Under extreme pressure, you performed well. Caleb looked at her image on the station screen. That sounded suspiciously like encouragement. Do not get used to it. He changed the model. The second version varied the dark intervals by region, but moved one reflected band through a polarization angle that would pull a migrating group toward the irrigation basin. Neris caught it during simulation. Caleb corrected the angle without argument. The third version preserved the biological timing and the city limits, but required too many large mirror movements. Pavel showed that several drives would exceed their long-term allowance within a season. Caleb reduced the movements by grouping fields around common reflection angles. Neris adjusted planting patterns for the next cycle so the ground could carry part of the route. Neither of them solved the schedule alone. That dependence was the point. Some evenings, Caleb came down to Senra after his orbital shift. He said he needed to verify how the dark intervals looked from the ground. Neris noted that the field sensors were designed for exactly that. He came anyway. She showed him the resting sites beneath the broad leaves and the thin, polarized lines still visible to the pollinators after the human eye saw only dusk. He showed her how a mirror's tiny angle error became kilometers of movement on the plane. Their conversations grew less formal. He learned that Neris took her meals late whenever a field test was active, then claimed she had simply forgotten the time. She learned that Caleb checked every safe path twice, then a third time if he was worried enough to make a joke. Neither called those observations affection. They did not need to. For days after the crisis, the first seed structures began forming in the surviving fields. Neris brought Caleb to the plants before she sent the report. She opened one flower casing and showed him the developing seeds inside. Early formation, she said, not proof of viability. You have become extremely cautious with good news. I learned from an engineer. A terrible influence. But he understood why she had brought him. The small structures were physical evidence of what their dashboards had missed. The swarms had not merely survived. They had completed the work the season required. The harvest assessment arrived the same day. The cut corridor and heat damage sections reduced the expected yield by a visible amount. Tovin did not soften the report. Neris signed it beside the ecological findings and attached the seed projections. No one could call the outcome free. That made the surviving future more credible. As the seeds matured, Dawnline operated under temporary limits. The continuous artificial dawn was gone. Shorter light bands crossed Senra, with wider dark spaces between them. Crop growth slowed from the inflated pace of the old schedule. Swarm visits increased. Pollen condition improved. The production dashboard no longer glowed green all the time. Neris preferred it that way. A dashboard should be allowed to admit uncertainty, she told Caleb. That is an alarming cultural proposal. For engineers, for managers. She laughed, and he looked away too slowly to hide that he liked the sound. The relationship between them changed in increments much like the new dawn. There was no single confession. There were choices. Caleb began sending her mirror paths before she requested them, because he knew she would need time to compare them with the swarms. Neris stopped treating every technical delay as resistance, because she had seen the cost of moving a hot drive too quickly. When he returned to orbit for a long maintenance cycle, she stayed on the channel through the difficult exterior work, but did not distract him with questions. When she spent a night examining damaged flower samples, he brought her a meal and left it beside the reader without telling her to stop. Neither act was dramatic. Both were remembered. 2 weeks after the crisis, Oren called them to the seed archive. Rows of sample trays filled the testing chamber. Seeds from the surviving fields have been cleaned, sorted, and placed under controlled conditions. Green shoots had begun to rise for most of them. Oren handed Neris the report. The viable count clears the minimum for next season, he said. Not by a wide margin, but clears it. Neris read the number twice. And a reserve? Enough for loss during storage and planting. Virelia will still import a small supplemental amount, but not as a permanent replacement. Caleb stood beside her, watching the shoots rather than the report. The system has passed more than 2/3 of the test, he said. Neris looked up. His expression was serious, but she recognized the reference to the swarm flying in circles. This time the subjects are moving in the correct direction. That improves the score. Oren glanced between them. I assume this is an orbital joke. It has expanded into agriculture, Neris said. She signed the seed confirmation. Only then did the tension she had carried since the first white beam begin to loosen. The crop loss remained. So did the living shoots. The proposed permanent dawnline schedule was ready for a controlled trial 3 days later. Caleb ran the mirrors from the station. Neris waited in Senra with Lena and a small group of sensors, not a crowd. Tovin had left the nearby fields undisturbed so the swarms would respond naturally. Dana confirmed every path outside Luma. Pavel confirmed the drives were within their new movement limits. Caleb opened the channel. Final biological check. Neris looked across the dark plain. The pollinators rested beneath the leaves. The flowers had not yet opened. Swarm state normal. Flower temperature normal. Begin on schedule. The first mirror group moved. Light appeared along the horizon, but it did not flood the whole plain. A warm band crossed the northern fields at the angle Neris had specified. The pollinators there stirred. They rose in a loose formation and followed the polarized line toward the first flowering block. Caleb ended the band. Darkness returned. No alarm sounded. The swarms settled briefly, adjusted their direction, and waited. The second band appeared farther south. Another group rose. The first continued without colliding with it. From the ground, the artificial dawn looked incomplete. Light occupied one part of the sky, while another remained dark. The bands were softer than the old white sheet, and separated by deliberate pauses. To Neris, it was the first time Dawn Line had looked alive. Northern group is en route, Lena said. Southern group stable, Neris replied. Caleb moved the third mirror group. The light crossed a field planted along the new common angle. The ground pattern and the sky pattern aligned, reducing the movement the mirrors needed. Pavel reported stable motor temperatures. Dana reported a clear city corridor. Neris reported normal swarm behavior. No one had to improvise. The final band crossed Senra and faded. Natural darkness remained in the spaces between. Caleb came down to the plain after the trial. Neris waited near the same part of the field where the first rescued swarms had taken shelter. The seed net was gone, but a pale fragment of its heat-curled edge had been recovered and placed beside the field console as a reminder. He stopped next to it. I am told the test succeeded. You watched the same data. I wanted the ecological version. Nothing fell from the sky. Nothing overheated. The flowers open on time. The swarms reached them. Very technical. I have been influenced by an engineer. They walked beyond the console. Two artificial bands still glowed far apart on the horizon as the schedule completed its last calibration. Between them lay a broad area of darkness. Caleb and Neris sat on the low edge of an irrigation channel inside that dark space. For several minutes, neither spoke. The darkness was no longer a failure in the schedule. It had a defined duration, a protected angle, and a biological purpose. Dawnline had been instructed to leave it alone. Neris looked toward the faint movement of wings in the next field. The schedule needs a full reproductive season before we call it finished. Agreed. The mirror groups will need someone who understands why the limits cannot be averaged away. That sounds like work. It is. Caleb turned toward her. The reflected band to the east placed a narrow line of light along one side of her face, while the rest remained in the protected. Dark, are you asking Dawnline to keep me on Virelia? Dawnline does not make staffing decisions. A rare gap in its authority. Neris held his gaze. I'm asking you. The words were quiet and direct. Caleb looked out at the broken dawn. He had spent most of his career removing gaps, correcting drift, and making systems behave as one clean pattern. Virelia had taught him that some gaps were not errors. Some were the conditions that allowed everything around them to continue. Then yes, he said, I will stay. Neris's shoulders eased. For the full season? Longer if you keep finding systems that need someone to stop optimizing the life out of them. That may be a permanent position. I was hoping it would be. She reached for his hand. There was no audience, no announcement, and no promise larger than what they had already proved through action. They sat together while the two bands of dawn moved past on either side. The darkness between them remained. For the first time, it did not look like something missing. It looked like the reason another season could begin. If Caleb and Neris's journey stayed with you, please like this story, share it with someone who believes the future is worth protecting, and subscribe for more unforgettable science fiction filled with courage, wonder, sacrifice, and hope. Thank you for listening and for traveling with us to Virelia. Until next time, remember that sometimes the future survives not because we fill every darkness with light, but because we finally understand which darkness must remain.